Prime Minister, who will be the next Labour leader in the next election. And we're having the first election in the Labour Party since 1994. And instead of all the speculation about the Prime Minister, he announced he was going anyway. Nobody else announced it. He said it years ago, last year. Now the question is, what policy should we follow? Now, we know Gordon Brown will be a candidate. What's his attitude to the Lebanon? What's his attitude to staying in Afghanistan or
The thing is, you have leapfrogged possibly 12 months in terms of getting to that debate.
That's what democracy is about, isn't it?
The trouble is, the party at the moment are absolutely focusing on the individuals and actually wanting this question to be answered.
Well, but I know, but you could help a bit, you see, because John McDonnell is the one Labour MP who said, I'm going to stand and here's my policy. Now, what I'd like to hear is other people say, I've no idea what John Reid thinks about foreign policy. I want to hear the debate because as an individual member of the Labour Party, I've got some say for the first time for 12 years. I'm quite excited, and other people the same. So let's look at it, look forward, and don't regard every debate in the Labour Party as a split, a fight, a row. It's a debate.
Tony, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment to tell our viewers some breaking news, because just in the last few seconds the Press Association reporting that the Labour MP Tom Watson has resigned as Junior Defence Minister, saying it was not in the interests of either the party or the country for Tony Blair to remain in office. That is the exact quote. Was not in the interest of either the party or the country for Tony Blair to remain in office. That coming from Tom Watson, the Junior Defence Minister. That news just in. Let us return to Tony Benn, and as you can see, I know you're talking about policies and want people to focus on that, but with news developing like I've just read out, you can see what the problem is.
Well, I mean, he's a Junior Defence Minister. He has a responsibility for what's happening in Afghanistan, where a lot of soldiers have been killed. And therefore perhaps his attitude is based on the fact he's opposed to the war in Afghanistan. But I do think it's important not to allow this to be treated as if it's who's going to win an Oscar. I mean, there are millions of people who are worried about their jobs, their pensions, their health. They're worried about, they may have a child, a son fighting in Iraq, and they turn on the telly and all they hear is the personality stuff. So I'm making a fair point, really.
So what was your advice to all of those within the Labour Party who seem to be saying that this is an issue that needs to be sorted out here and now? So all of those issues about policy can be sorted out, and we've got the local elections coming up next May that a lot of people are very concerned about. What would your advice to those people be?
Well, I think advice to anyone who wants to be a candidate, tell us now, if you were elected, what your policy would be. Tell us.
But by doing that, though, haven't you actually triggered the leadership campaign?
No, but the leadership campaign has begun, you know that. The leadership campaign began when the Prime Minister said he wasn't going to stand again. And then people can say, well, do we agree with this? Do we want to go on privatising the health service? Do we want pensioners to be on a means test? Do we want students to be saddled with fees that lead them into debt? And you see, once these points are put forward, people say, oh, I rather agree with that, I agree with that. And I think that is the way to proceed, and therefore, for me at any rate, a democratic choice is a moment of opportunity, and to hear on the media and so on, it's all a crisis, a split, a disaster. It isn't. It's an opportunity that we rarely have to choose our leader. The Tories elected Cameron, the Liberals elected Ming Campbell. Now we're going to elect our leader. What's wrong with that?
When it comes to the election, all of those issues are going to be discussed. What do you make of the various quotes that have come from the top levels of the party? And constantly they keep using the phrase of not turning the clock back when we get to the point of the election campaigning. Do you see that as a red herring, or have they acknowledged that perhaps there is a desire somewhere within the Labour Party to do that?
Well, I mean, if somebody comes along and says we were absolutely right to go into Iraq and Afghanistan, it'd be a good idea if we attacked Iran, say it. I don't think for a moment they'd win. But at least if people want to say we've got to privatise more, say it, and then see what happens. I don't think people would like it very much, you know.
Just coming back to the Prime Minister, you've seen all the coverage and have watched it for months, if not years, about talks of legacies, about perhaps who Tony Blair's successor may or may not be. Is that inevitable when you talk about Prime Ministers coming to the end of the term, or is there an element of arrogance trying to actually shape a future as a Prime Minister when you're actually not going to be there?
Well, good point. I mean, when Wilson resigned, I was in the Cabinet. He came into the Cabinet, he said, I'm leaving the Cabinet to tell the Queen I'm resigning. I had a hint it might happen. Then there was an election. I stood, Dennis Healey stood, Roy Jenkins stood, Jim Callaghan stood, and Jim won, and Jim was different from Harold. And you see, what I find so puzzling, we're telling everyone we want democracy in the Middle East, but where is it a little bit of democracy comes to Britain, everybody gets in a panic. Crisis, split, and I think the media have a heavy responsibility. Why did you go and interview all the possible candidates and say, if you were leader, what would you do? Now that would be thrilling, because we would then be able to hear. You'd find your ratings would go up.
We'll come back to it. We can argue it for a long time.